Hi, everyone. It is wonderful to be here. I'm going to put my watch back on. I see so many familiar faces, and the rest of you are people I'd like to be friends with. So that's the best kind of room. So I think I'm going to start just with a little bit of the backstory behind the issue of sources that Sarit held up, the concerning community. And then I will orient you toward the source sheet that you've got, and then we'll move into Chavruta. So that's our sort of part one plan for today. Does anyone need a source sheet? Who has an extra source sheet? All right, let's make a match. Oh, there was one closer. Good. So folks often ask me, where do the themes for each issue of sources, where do the themes come from? And it's not really a straightforward process or anything particularly predictable or definable, because each one has been a little bit different. And with this theme on community, this was a theme that really made itself known, I would say. Rather than us inventing it or putting it together, this was a theme that demanded our attention. We accept unsolicited contributions to the journal, in addition to commissioning pieces. And usually, most of the pieces in an issue are commissioned. But we were getting unsolicited pieces that all were talking about community. And so when I say that the theme presented itself to us, that's what I mean. Without any planning on our part, this theme was emerging from the material that was coming in unsolicited, and we decided to lean in. And the other thing that really shaped this issue was the timing of it. I talk about this in my editor's letter, so I won't talk about it at length, but it was amazing to me to see, as this issue took shape. Every issue takes about 9 months from the time we decide on a theme, I start talking to writers, until it arrives in your mailbox. And over that 9 months that it took, so basically I was starting about a year ago, just about now. Over those 9 months, the ways that people were talking about community began to shift. So we started, or the issue started to come together at a time when people were really worried about boundaries, in the sense of, what are our boundaries? How do we define them? Because we need to know who's in and who's out. Who is in our community, who is outside our community. And we need to know that locally, at our particular organization or shul or school or whatever it might be. We need to know that nationally, right? The American Jewish community needs to have clear boundaries, and we need to know that even on a global level, as we try to connect with the Jewish people, right? With Jews in other parts of the world, in Israel and elsewhere. So that's where we started. But over the course of those 9 months, the conversation began to shift, and the pieces that came in later, and also as some of those earlier pieces, as they went through the editing process, there was a shift towards, we need to talk across difference. We need to rebuild relationships. There was a shift away from the idea that boundaries have to be clear, that we need to know who is in and who is out, and more of an interest in, how do we speak across boundaries? How do we respect boundaries, respect shared values, and also engage respectfully, openly with people who we disagree with or who disagree with us? And it was really wonderful for me as editor to see that shift. And as you look at the table of contents, or as you read, you'll see that some pieces lean more in one direction, in the direction of boundaries and boundary creation and maintenance, and other pieces lean more in that direction of moving across boundaries or openness across difference. But both of them, I think, are very much of the moment, and the journal, the issue as a whole, gives a reflection, I think, of where we are. The material I have for you today is a combination of material from the journal. I have 3 articles are included on your source sheet. I know you've already looked at one of them, the Berger. But mostly, I want to focus on material that's not in the journal, some of my own thinking about community. And I like to think of this is like the pre-story to the issue. I want to sort of present what I think of as the larger, more timeless issues of community, and especially about the question of what is possible in community. Right? What is possible in community that an individual, simply an individual human being, but for our purposes, an individual Jew, cannot have alone? Right? What do we find in community that we cannot find on our own? That, to me, is really the question that's driving any really investigation of community. And you probably, if you went back and looked through the table of contents with that question, or after we've gone through my source sheet, you probably can identify how the articles fit the framework that I'm going to share today as well. So, if you look at your source sheet, my background's in teaching college students, and for me, one of the most important differences between teaching college students and teaching adults, there's 2. One is I don't have to give you grades, which is amazing. And the second is with adults, I hand out the source sheet before we actually need it, because I know you're not going to be totally distracted. And even if you are, you're already thinking through the material and not paging through, trying to calculate how many minutes until class is over. Although you may be. I trust that you're not. Or fewer of you are in the room. How's that? I know our next event is dinner. So you'll see on the source sheet, I've divided it into 2 halves of different sizes. The first half I'm calling the individual in horizontal community, by which I mean the individual in community with other people at the time in the place where they are living, right? Us here together, we are a horizontal community. We are brought together by shared interests, shared commitments, and so on and so forth. And the second part I named the individual in vertical community, right, which is community across time, right, in community with our ancestors, both long, long ago, but also maybe just a generation before us. We may know them, they may be alive with us today, as well as those who will come after us, some of whom are already alive, and others of whom we will never know. We're going to spend most of our time on horizontal community, because those are the kinds of communities that are our priority right now, I think. Those are the communities that are turning to us and asking for guidance and leadership and help. But we'll close with vertical community as sort of taking a step back and a moment to remember how all of our horizontal community building fits into the larger Jewish story. So that's the plan for where we're going. With this individual and horizontal community, we're going to start with the first 3 sources on the source sheet. And I'm going to have you read them in Chavruta. So let me tell you a little bit about each one of them, and then I'll give you some questions to guide your Chavruta work, and then we'll come back together and spend the rest of our time together as a large group. So the first source by Leora Eilon is a contemporary Midrash. I actually dated it in the future. I apologize. That should be spring 2025. I'm working on spring 2026 now. Apparently, it's entered my brain a little bit too strongly. Leora is a survivor of an attack on her kibbutz on October 7th. She lost her son in that massacre. And this is a midrash that she wrote that will be published, or has just been published, I'm not sure, in the 3rd volume of Dir Shuni, which are Israeli women's contemporary midrashim, really, really wonderful. And it was translated into English. We were very lucky to be able to publish it in advance. I'm really grateful that we were able to do that. So this is her Midrash about community, and the title that she gives it, The Power of a Community to Diminish Suffering in the World, of course, speaks to her own personal situation, and really tells you already what it's going to be about. So community as a means of dealing with pain, of making pain manageable. Your second source from Michael Sandel. Sandel is a philosopher. The book is called The Tyranny of Merit. But in the short passages that I've given you, he introduces a concept called contributive justice. And in that phrase, contributive justice, the word that I think is going to be most important for us today is contributive. For justice, just know that he thinks that part of why we form communities is for the sake of justice, to create fairness in society. But for him, that word contributive is what he's trying to add to the conversation. He's trying to introduce this idea that communities, good communities, strong communities, communities that last, are communities that are defined by what people bring to them, the value they bring, and how they feel, or simply how they are valued, right? That the individuals are valued, and that the individuals, all of them, bring something of value to the community. Your third source, I should say, I'm trained in modern Jewish thought, so 1965 is like the Middle Ages for me. Our oldest source. I have like a fan here. When I do stand up, I'm going to get you a ticket in the front row. So this is probably the text that the most people in the room have read before, The Lonely Man of Faith by Rav Soloveitchik. And what I've selected for you here is a passage that speaks to community as a response, or really as a solution to existential loneliness. For me, this is an incredible, I choose this text as an incredible illustration of what spiritual community can or should be. So we start with source number one, community and shared pain. Source number two, community as a collection of individuals contributing and valuing one another. And source number three, spiritual community. I'm not going to make an overarching claim that these are the only types of community. They are not. They're certainly not even all the types of community we could find in Jewish sources or in Jewish tradition. But they're distinct. That's part of why I've brought them together. And hopefully, if you have other models in mind, I'd like you to think about whether they resemble one, two, or three more, or just plan to bring them in when we have our conversation. So this is like a three-part model that is inherently, knowingly incomplete. I'm going to give you some discussion questions. These are very general. You can use them or not use them. It's really up to you and the folks you're working with, except for the first one, which you all already know which is make sure everyone understands the pshat, right? Don't move forward, read the source, and don't move forward with your group until everyone is certain they understand, just on the simplest level, what is this author trying to say. So we'll call this all understand the pshat. Number two, probably relatedly, is how does this author define community? And ways you might think about that. How does one join this community? What are the boundaries? Right, back to that question. Who's in and who's out? And then, have you ever been part of a community like this or tried to build a community like this? And then, relatedly, do you know of a community like this in the Jewish world today? Right? Can you name a community like this or point to a community like this? It may be that this is the sort of community you either aim to build and lead yourself, or that you already are successfully leading yourself, having built it already. And if so, what makes it work? And if you're more dreaming of this sort of community, why? What do you think the work is that is involved in transforming the community you're currently a part of into the sort of community you want to see? You can take it in any of these directions. I'm just going to quickly write that down. I'm going to put it down here as identify any real communities, like actual communities you know of that fit this model. And then I had like an addendum of maybe you are already part of one, trying to build one. What does that look like? What are the struggles? Any just logistical questions, housekeeping questions?
Got more sheets?
Yes. Are there extra source sheets people can wave in the air? Looks like, I feel like people should be building paper airplanes, but we'll get them to where they need to go. If anyone else needs one, you can also raise your hand. We'll make it happen. Just a moment, we're getting there. So as time allows, I'm going to give you a time in a moment. I always like to make that decision at the very last second. If you run out of material, or if you exhaust the material, let's put it that way, what we're going to do next is we will look at sources, the sources from Berger and Berger from the journal. And so I'd like you to look at sources 4 and 6, which are the 2 Talmudic passages that they're each commenting on. So you're focused on 1 through 3. If you have extra time, you can look at sources 4 and 6. Let me think for a moment. Let's go we will go at least until 5:25. I will poke around if it seems like folks need until 5:30. It is fast, I know. I will pay attention, and if it seems like people need more time, I will allow it, but I want you to stay focused. Given the fact that it's a limited amount of time, you may choose to start with 2 or start with 3, knowing that you won't necessarily get to them all. Okay? I would rather you go deep than go broad. Anything else? All right. See you soon. I know we're all teachers, so we all know that this is one of the hardest parts of the job, is interrupting wonderful conversations. The other hard part of the job is keeping track of time and making sure that we stay on schedule. So I want to take just a few minutes to share a little bit of our discussions with one another, and then we'll move on in the source sheets. So I want to invite you, we're going to start at the end with that last question. I'd like to invite, if anyone wants to share a community they've been a part of or that they've seen or known that fits one of these models, and if you could tell us a little bit about it. Yeah, Rivka.
I'm a part of a Havara in Chicago that fits number 2. We originally started just as a Shabbat minyan like 30 years ago, but then we started aging. People needed help, people needed rides, people needed food, people were dying, people were being married, people were having shivas, and we decided, well, we want to be there for each other, and we had to decide we're going to have to give the time and effort and money and what it takes to be a community. There was a shift in consciousness. And it was a big part of it. We all did need each other.
I do know it. Okay, so we have the example of the Chavura, and I think the Chavura movement in a lot of ways broadly fits this model, right, of loose leadership in the sense that everybody has to lead at something, do something, contribute something, but specifically through the very natural process of aging and recognizing growing needs. Yes.
I was thinking about rallies, like the, bring them home weekly rallies
You might need to turn it on.
Wherever there might be taking place, like every Sunday in Central Park at 5 p.m., people come together and cry about. So that's the first one. That's that type of community, the Liora Alone one, and so too, sorry, that's at 10 a.m. and at 5 p.m. in Union Square.
You go
right?
up and down the city.
There's more crying about both the hostages and about Palestinians. So I'm noticing it in these in rallies and vigil spaces.
Thank you. So this is rallies as a place of shared pain. Which is the hardest kind of community to build? Yeah.
We noted that we thought it was
Microphone.
we noted that it was somewhat easier or much easier to build a community built out of pain than one built out of joy. That we can get people to come to difficult funerals or tragedies much more readily than saying to, let's say, the board of your shul, please come because there's a kid's bar mitzvah that you don't know. But God forbid there's a kid who died, they'll come to that funeral. So the sadness makes us come together more quickly than joy often.
Thank you. That Sandel is the hardest. Why? The contributive justice.
I think I still need to chew on it, but for me personally,
I'm going to give you a microphone.
It feels very, it's very intentional. You have to be very alive and awake to everything that you are partaking of. It's not obvious.
Mm-hmm.
It's a practice, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anyone else? And I'm happy to open it up to anything you want to share from your conversation. Shannon, right behind you.
You were asking about different examples of like where did we find these communities today? And this is like a horribly trivial sounding example of the first kind of community, but my understanding of the first community, and this piece is just so powerful, but it's really the idea that of shared emotion, that everybody is sharing in the emotion of the other. And the really trivial examples that I thought of, but honestly is where community lives for so many Americans is, being a sports fan, mm-hmm. right? So people are both celebrating and depressed together. It's kind of, and rock concerts, that people are all singing together. They're all feeling the emotions of the musician together, right? That and the spreading of that by the musician is sort of out with everybody now.
So I don't think that's a trivial example at all. First of all, I'm a Cubs fan, so understood. And I'm raising two Cubs fans. That's the hardest part. But it makes me realize something that's actually already been, or was already implied, but wasn't obvious to me in earlier comments, which is that communities that share pain are often temporary. Right? We talked about a funeral, about a rally, about a sporting event, and honestly, any of those could have elements of pain and joy. We're drawn to them, but they're temporary. You leave. I want to point out one other thing about this, the difference between pain and joy that struck me, which is this Midrash makes very clear, and I think it's a really important point, that when we share in someone else's pain or we build a community to share pain lessens, or at least I think that's a common experience. The pain of the mourners, let's say, at the center is made 1 degree more bearable by having others with them. It's why we go visit at a shiva. But joy, when someone shares in your joy increases. Or let's say it should, or that's our expectation. Yeah?
I think that's one thing we always say about sacred communities, about synagogues, is
Microphone, sorry.
Sorry, I think that's one thing we often say about why join a synagogue is that we lessen the pain of the sorrows and increase the joy of the simchas. You know,
I
that
love
we
that.
when we celebrate simchas and sorrows together, we enhance both of them. And it's a strange word, but we enhance the sorrows by making it less and enhance the joy by making it more.
That's lovely. Thank you. Perhaps I'll stop talking. Let's go just in a row there on that side of the room.
Thank you. If I could just remind us all of, as if we needed reminding, of this community in Israel that seems to have not sprung up, but continued from the demonstrations every week on Motzei Shabbat, when first they were dealing with the judicial overstepping,
yeah.
however you want to call it, and then it turned into a weekly vigil, I guess, and still is for the hostages, and they aren't necessarily, relatives, but there is this phenomenon now that's been going on every single week for 2 years.
Out of curiosity, how many of us in the room were at any one of those rallies, either for the hostages or against the judicial reforms? Think about that experience of having your own personal frustration and grief for that hour, right, to be part of that larger crowd. It's very powerful, and you're right that it is sustained from week to week, and there are people who are organizing it from week to week. It's not spontaneous. Thank you. Yeah, there were two more.
I'm really trying to work through the Sandel piece. I'm trying
Great,
to
let's
imagine.
spend some time there.
I'm really trying to imagine what this community could be like that focused on ends as a really constitutive part of it, that it is really gotten together and agreed that we have a common goal and that is going to last, not, the common goal of defeating so-and-so that ends with a thing, but it's going to be a continuing common goal that we really can all agree on and that can make us feel like we're in there together for a very long time. I know why this has not gotten really great play in Western political philosophy, because I think most folks think that's impossible or it is tyrannical. And I'm trying to I'd like to give it some space and try to think what that means. How would that work? That's all I want to say.
No, it's a great comment. So let's spend a little time with the Sandel. I'm going to take prerogative of the presenter and share a little bit how I think about it. And I want to offer two things. And the first is I think it's easy to focus on the question of process. How is this going to happen? Are people really going to sit together in a room and deliberate their priorities and agree on priorities and then figure out how everybody's going to fit into the priorities? I agree, that sounds miserable and overwhelming. And even if you started with 100 people on day one, by the end, you might be left with the one person trying to impose their will as a tyrant. But if we think instead less about process and more maybe about, I want to give an example of a time when I think it has happened, and I want to give an example of how one person can help it to happen in whatever community you're talking about. And Sandel's writing about American society, which is really hard to imagine, but I think we can bring it down to scale and think about a community. And so I want to start with an example. And I think that during the pandemic, especially in those first few months when we were all under lockdown, that we experienced a little bit of the rethinking or it was like a shove to see things differently and recognize contributions that usually are not seen. Right? The first responders, not the doctors per se, but the people driving the ambulance and taking the stretcher out of the sick room to bring somebody to the hospital. The people who delivered our food, who cooked our food from restaurants when we were tired of scrambled eggs or whatever, the people who were still picking up trash. And we can keep going. There were teachers who went back to classrooms before they felt totally safe and took risks being with our children, and so on and so forth. And I think that idea of the essential worker, for as long as we really had it in the front of our minds, was a little bit of what Sandel was talking about. That in a society, part of what he's getting at in the book as a whole is he's arguing that we've sort of overvalued a certain set of skills and talents. We call them, and we reward them, and we claim that we're rewarding people because of merit. We let them into our fanciest colleges, and they go on from there to have the best paying jobs, and so on and so forth. And we've built a society in which people who have other skills and other talents become invisible and don't feel valued, and their contributions are unseen, and so on. And so I think the idea of essential worker was a helpful corrective, although I think we've lost it already. The second thing, though, that I want to share when I think about this is what can I as an individual do to make my community a little bit more like what he's envisioning? And some of you have heard this story before. But when I was in college and getting involved at Hillel, there was a student who had graduated the year before. Her name was Wendy. I actually told this story recently to someone who had been there with me, and he told me actually she's Wendy Smith. So Wendy Smith, that was how much she was like a mythological figure, is until recently she didn't even have a last name. But Wendy Smith's rule was that you have to call everyone you want to be there and tell them to bring the green-jello. Right? And the green-jello could be anything, right? But if you're not there, we won't have the green-jello, and we cannot have the event, the program, the whatever, without the green-jello. I really need you to be there, whoever you are, whatever it is that you can bring. And of course, it's about the relationship. It's that I, the leader, am reaching out to somebody and making them feel wanted, and that's a part of it. It's about seeing the person and what they can bring, and making them feel needed. And it's really, really small. But if you've ever been a part of a community where you felt like you had something to offer and nobody ever asked you to bring it or to give it, and you felt awkward about volunteering because you kind of assumed it wasn't really valued, because if it was valued, somebody would have asked you to do it, that's the problem on a community level. I belong to two minyanim because, one is never enough. And there's one that knows I know how to read Torah, and there's one that doesn't. And sometimes I sit there in the one that doesn't, and I think to myself, what will happen if I volunteered Elaine next week? And it's like, the angel and the devil, and part of it is like, well, it means that we won't have the same 3 people feeling so burdened to Lane every week. I should really help out. And then this is like the devil shoulder says, yeah, but then you'll have to do it every week. And we really don't want that. And then I have yet to tell anybody. I do other things there. But no, that one, no. The one we're in together knows. So anyway, but I think we all, I don't want to assume, but chances are many of us have had that moment of having something to offer and nobody asking us. And yeah, you should volunteer, you should offer, but also it's good to be asked. It's really different. Nobody likes the person who shows up at the potluck with the dish nobody wants to eat, right? But if you're told, we really need your potato salad, and someone else is going to bring their challah, well, it's a really different experience. There was a hand. Yes?
The issue I always have is having any clue whatsoever that you have something to offer and what it is.
That's your job.
And it does, and it is my job. That's why it's a problem. Because no matter how often you ask, right, they put a call out for people who can lane, and you don't respond. Please don't take that personally.
It's okay. They didn't. They
Right?
have, yeah.
But nobody. But nobody
How would a
responds.
person know?
How would a person know? As we were talking earlier. Would a person know you're in the hospital? How would a rabbi know you're in the hospital unless somebody lets them know? The same kind of. And so it's got to be cooperative. It's got to be mutual in
Yeah.
many ways.
I think that that's right. And the question is rather than, if we go back to process, I don't think the question is how do we organize a meeting where we're all going to get together and decide to build a contributive community? I think the question is, God forbid, how do we create, or how do we continually invite people to share, to ask for help in their pain, to invite us into their joy, and also to bring what they can contribute and to value what everybody else contributes. It's not just about the laning. One, and then two, and then we're going to move on.
Sandel makes me think of a really highly functional kibbutz.
Yeah.
Where people are able to give what they need, and the guy who runs the laundry is really highly valued and should be, as is everyone else, for the work they can do.
Great. Thank you.
So, what do you do with the person who does bring the fruit mold that no one wants?
The actual green-jello?
Right. How do we value when it's actually not helpful or sometimes detrimental?
I don't know. We put these under the list of challenges to building this kind of community. Who's been in a shul where the person who claps loudest has no sense of rhythm? Or sings the loudest out of tune, right? I was not at Hadar very much. I've never lived in New York for very long, but rumors would reach me. I lived in California in the early years of Hadar, that they spent hours debating who was going to tell the guy who clapped off rhythm to cut it out without hurting his feelings. And it's believable, right? I don't have an answer, except that this is part of the challenge.
I think he showed up at my shul.
He's moved to Brooklyn. Well, we got to get him on to the next borough, right? Or out of state. All right. Right. That's one way to spread the pain. All right. Shh. All right. So what I'd like to do, we have about 10 minutes, and so I'm just going to say a quick word about the Berger and the Berger especially, and then we'll end with a little Buber. So source number, yes, Berger, Berger, Buber. Source number 5, which I know Ilana spoke about, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, for my colleague here at Hartman, Berger, is about, well, I'm going to read her words. If you look at the very last paragraph in the excerpt that you have, this is on page 4. She says, she says as liberal Zionists, but I think we can, it doesn't need to be that. It could be as X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. We need to share the fullness of our vision with the next generation, a fullness of vision that includes both our commitments and our concerns, our love for Israel, and our grave critiques of the present reality. We have been operating from a sense of threat, and like the rabbis in Psachim 49b, right, who were so negative and spoke about the Amei Haaretz, the Jews who were not rabbinic Jews, in such strident negative language, she says, our response has been human. We have closed ranks in order to protect that which we hold most dear. And in so doing, we have framed the conversation as a dispute between us and them, between the Jews and the un-Jews. She's taking language from an essay that came out in Tablet a few years ago, rather than as an exploration of what is and what should be, of what is possible and how to build it. I want to bring Berger in right after that to read them together. If you turn, Berger is source 7, but I want to turn to page 6 to the end. So Ben here is building on on literally just a phrase that appears in source number 6 about a day when Hillel and Shammai, their schools are really in dispute. And we're told that they stuck a sword in the study hall, like as though to say, these are the stakes, right? If you're here, you cannot leave until we figure this out, right? It's almost life and death. It was a relatively small issue, all things concerned. But Ben uses this to say is it feels like these are the stakes that we're fighting about now, as though everything is a matter of life and death, who is right and who is wrong. And it's us and it's them. Whether you're in Camp Shammai or Camp Hillel, you look at the other as enemy. And he builds on that. We're going to go a little earlier than I said. So at the bottom of, I guess this is page 5. The bottom of page 5. He says, the legal theorist and Nazi sympathizer Carl Schmitt famously argued that politics begins when a group defines itself by identifying an enemy. And I think that this is where the Berger and the Bearer, this is their meeting point. That community is simply us and not them. And they are both arguing, Bearer is arguing, let's spend a lot more time on us. Forget about them. Let's lean into who we are and who we want to be. And if our vision is rich enough, it will captivate us, it will captivate others, and what other people are up to, it doesn't really even have to matter if our vision is rich and meaningful and constructive. And what Berger is interested in, if you look at the very end of that paragraph, he says, more and more we are measuring belonging by what a person denounces, right? We are who we are not, or we are defined by who we are not, what we reject. If you look at the top of page 6, at the foundation, this is the second sentence of that top paragraph, at the foundation, beneath the fear and suspicion, lies something deeper and more primal, anger, a kind of anger that is cultivated and sustained over time. Sometimes we even enjoy it. We enjoy our anger. Next paragraph, some have called this a state of high conflict, when disagreement becomes magnetic, identity-forming, and emotionally self-sustaining. This is, I think, both Bear and Berger are diagnosing, like we've, in some ways, gotten stuck in this nearly 2 years since October 7th, but however you want to measure the time, we're sort of stuck, many of us, in this I'm not that, we're not that, and the emotion that's bringing us together is not pain or joy, but anger. He uses the image of a bridge, which is one we use a lot. He's really interested in connecting across difference, right? How do we bridge between the us and the them, which is a different argument than the one that Bear is making. That's where they part ways. We use bridges a lot to talk about connecting. And I want you to actually take the idea of a bridge seriously for a moment. Am I the only person in the room who actually hates walking on bridges? I'm not the only one, right? They're high up. Sometimes you can see like holes and you can see through to the water underneath. They're very long. I lived for a while in California, in the Bay Area, where you cross a lot of bridges, and there are also a lot of earthquakes. It's very scary to be on a bridge. Some bridges, he writes, are long, built across profound ideological, historical, or communal divides. Again, some bridges are built over rivers that are rushing and dangerous and frightening. They demand patience, integrity, and the humility to act without any guarantee of reciprocity. Right? I might have to cross the bridge all the way to the other side. It might be that no one's going to meet me in the middle. But it's really this last paragraph here that I like in terms of what he does with bridges. He says some bridges are wide, right? Some bridges are narrow, but some are wide, designed to hold maximal diversity of viewpoints. They are often disorienting, sometimes uncomfortable, but they stretch us in ways that narrower spaces cannot. I want to just point out what he did there. He went from saying a bridge is something that takes us from A to B, and I'm on side A, and I want to talk to person B, so we're going to build a bridge. He just said a bridge is something wide. It's not about A to B. It's about all of us in the middle. And the wider the bridge is, the more people we can fit on it. Forget about where you're going, Claire, right? Forget about whether there's going to be an earthquake. Take a moment and look around at everyone who's on the bridge with you. All right. I'm going to keep us 5 minutes late. I apologize. Source number 9. So we're moving here from horizontal community to vertical. And I'm going to share with you, I wrote a dissertation on Martin Buber. He's taken up a lot more time in my life than I really want to admit. But this is one of my very, very favorite of his essays and one of my very, very favorite paragraphs from that essay, or maybe it's a couple of paragraphs that I gave you. Yeah, it's 2 paragraphs. Buber spent 10 years from 1909 or 1908 to 1918 on the road giving talks, especially to young Jewish people who were asking, many of them from really secular backgrounds, what is this Jewishness? And at the end of it, he wrote this essay called Cherut on youth and religion. And he describes this period, youth, being young, as a time before you've made any commitments whatsoever. Right? I've taught this many times to people who were at this stage in their lives, and I ask them to imagine, I'll ask you to imagine, that you are standing in the middle of a field, and you could move in any direction. 360 degrees, you could turn around and set off in any direction. Once you choose a direction, you'll keep going in that direction, or maybe you'll zigzag, but you can't ever really retrace. And your options in terms of which way you'll move are going to grow more limited. But that moment before you choose which direction you're going to go into, that is what it's like to be young, according to Buber. And there's a tendency, Buber didn't have the language of bucket list, but it's really what he's getting at. Buber believes when you're young and you're open in that way, that's really when you're most spiritually open as well, and when it's most likely that you'll have some kind of experience or encounter with God, spirituality, let's call it, spirit simply. And there's a tendency to treat it as a bucket list experience. Right? What do I want to do? I want to get a tattoo. I want to go windsurfing. I want to have my spiritual experience. I want to learn how to cook, and on and on. Mistake, right? I'll give you the Cliff's Notes. That's a mistake. So he says one can be a rationalist, a free thinker, or an atheist, but one cannot, in a religious sense, be a collector of experiences, a boaster of moods, or a prattler about God, right? That's not what an experience of God or what a true spirituality is about. So what do young people need? They need our help in figuring out how not to treat their spirituality as a collection of experiences. And here is how they can be saved, as he puts it, from the error. Top of page 7. How can youth be saved from this error? Or rather, how can youth save itself from it? It has a great helper by its side, the living community of the people. I'm going to correct his totally historically appropriate sexism. Only the disengaged person, incapable of drawing upon any source deeper than that of their private existence, will degrade the unconditional, that's God, will degrade God's impact to an experience and respond with literary effusions to the music of the spheres. The person who is truly bound to their people cannot go wrong, not because they have at their disposal the symbols and forms that millennia of their people's existence have created for envisioning as well as for serving the unconditional, but because the faculty to create images and forms flows into them from this bond to their people. I said, the person who is truly bound to their people. What I love about this passage is that what we inherit from the people who come before us, from the sources that they leave for us, is not a script. It doesn't tell us what to say in response to our spiritual experience or how to shape our spiritual cravings. It doesn't tell us exactly what direction to go. But it becomes in a sense raw materials, and it gives us the confidence that we have the faculties, the capabilities that we need ourselves to add to that, to add creatively, let's say, to that tradition that we inherit. And so I'm going to close with two things. The first is I want to go back to the beginning. And I said I was giving you three models of community, and the first was the community that shares in the burden. I'm going to expand that and call that the emotional community, the community that's brought together by emotions and shares those emotions. We talked about pain, we talked about joy, we talked about anger. We have the contributive community, or the community of the green-jello. We have the spiritual community. We didn't really talk about it, but with Soloveitchik, the image of God, Adam, and Eve. That Adam and Eve and God is the third. That's the first community. So not the individual and God, but the two individuals, the family. I'm going to use that as a small community, and God. And then I want to add the fourth, which is simply the creative community. And we saw that, I think, especially with Berger and with Berger, and that's what I would call Buber's image of community across time. The last thing I want to say is simply that community is really hard. I'm a total introvert. I don't like a lot of people. I mean, I like a lot of people, but like I am not close with a lot of people. But I know that the power of community in my life has been tremendous. It has done incredible things for me. And that the chance to, I don't want to say to give back to community, but to lead community, to shape community, and even to articulate what community is or can be, is for me the best way of expressing my appreciation for that. So thank you for being here in a learning community.